There's the clicker. Brilliant. Thank you very much, Mark. And yeah, it's absolutely fantastic to be here. As Mark said, it's actually Mental Health Awareness Week this week. I work with quite a few mental health charities. I'm an ambassador for Rethink Mental Illness, for SANE, and for Young Minds. So it's a really big week for me and for the charities that I'm involved with. I just thought we'd try something before we sort of start properly on nutrition. Could you just all stand up for a minute? Thank you very much. What I'd like you to do is just follow instructions. Please stay standing if you or any member of your family has ever been touched by any kind of mental illness. My own experience is of suffering from anxiety and depression. Yours might be different, bipolar, post-traumatic stress. But if you've been touched by any kind of mental illness at all, my request is, please, could you stay standing up? There's no right or wrong. Okay, great. Has everybody decided? Good. Okay, so isn't that amazing? We've all been touched by some kind of mental illness or in our families, which is sort of what we would expect from the numbers. Thank you very much. No, it's not over. Right, okay, now, only stay standing if you have felt that you've been able to be really open about that experience of mental illness, particularly in your place of work with your colleagues. You've been able to chat about it. Look, obviously, I'm a bit extreme. I don't have to go to my lengths, but if you felt able to have that conversation and be open about that experience of mental illness, please stay standing. And if that's not your experience, please could you sit down? Okay, has everybody decided? Okay, scary bit over. You can all sit down. I just wanted to start like that because I think we've seen that in 2018, stigma is a big issue and it's alive and well. And in fact, I myself felt huge sense of sort of shame and stigma of suffering from depression. And I think one of the reasons that nutrition has been so important to me is that understanding some of the physical impact of mental illness and equally how what we can eat and how our nutrition can help our mental health is a fantastic way of dissolving stigma. Because it's understanding this fact that mind and body are not just connected, they're indissoluble. So I hope at the end of this event that maybe we could even try that exercise again. And by segging into understanding this kind of mind-body link and the role of nutrition in mental health, you know, maybe we'll all find it something that's easier to talk about. It certainly worked for me. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm just going to tell you my story, and then I'm going to hand over to Alice, because actually my story and Alice's story are very much joined at the hip. So what happened was, we've got to rewind to 1997. I'm looking around the room. Maybe some of you were not alive in 1997. Yeah, anyway. I was in my early 30s at that point, and I was a journalist. I was working at the Times newspaper, and I had a great job. I loved my job. Very exciting, you know, reporter. But I was definitely quite stressed, you know, keep calm and juggle on. I had 2 small children, and my husband worked in financial services. Again, a really exciting job. Again, quite stressed. And then what happened was, one night, I couldn't get to sleep. Quick show of hands, anyone here suffer from insomnia? That's actually quite a lot of us. Okay. You'll probably know quite a well-known sign potentially of anxiety and depression. I didn't know that at the time. I just knew that one night I couldn't get to sleep. But that wasn't all, because I also began to feel really quite unwell. I was lying there, and my heart started racing, thump, thump, thump. Do you ever know that thing when you get a shoe in a washing machine and it goes thump, thump, thump? It was like that, thump, thump, thump. And I remember feeling really sick, like I had to throw up. My whole stomach was really kind of, you know, really, really very nauseous. And my mind was absolutely racing. My mind went something like this. Well, if I don't get to sleep, I can't get to work. If I can't get to work, I won't pay the bills. If I won't pay the bills, I won't pay the mortgage. I won't pay the mortgage. Lose the house, lose the children. All over. Now, this kind of thinking is called catastrophizing. It's very common for people who suffer from anxiety and depression. Again, I didn't know this at the time. I just knew I felt very, very frightened. Didn't know what was going on. Anyway, the next morning I thought, right, refasten activity to its normal timetable. You know, I'll breakfast at breakfast time, I'll lunch at lunchtime, I'll dine at dinner time, I'll sleep at night time, and I'll get back to my normal, functioning life. And unfortunately I didn't. I couldn't get to sleep the next night, nor the next night, and I felt iller and iller and iller. And on the Friday, I found myself in hospital. And I assumed that I was having a heart attack, because this beating heart, this racing heart, hadn't gone away. And the doctor sat me down, and I thought, all right, cardiologist. And the doctor said, no. He said, I'm not a cardiologist. He said, I'm a psychiatrist. I said, no. You made a mistake. Not that sort of person at all. He said, yes, no, I'm sorry. He said, you're showing classic signs of a major anxiety-driven depressive episode. So the fear or flight syndrome has gone into kind of chronic, i.e. ongoing overdrive. I want to empty my stomach, throw up, to run faster, because I imagine this line on the savannah, my heart's beating, my head's racing, and trying to grip this sort of nameless fear, which has tripped me into this state of heightened anxiety, as doctors describe it. So I was treated then in hospital. I was very ill for 6 months, and I was treated with drugs. So my kind of drugs are the sort of drugs, I'm sure you've all got your own kinds of drugs. Anyway, my kind of drugs are the sort of antidepressants that calm you down. There's different kinds of antidepressants. And in addition, sleeping pills and sort of anti-anxiety medication. Now, that was quite a while ago. You might know that there's been no major shift in the NHS of treating anxiety, stress, or depression in 30 years. It's still basically a medication-driven approach with a little bit of cognitive behavioural therapy, if you're lucky enough to get it. And that was my experience. I was treated with drugs. I did get better, went back to work, shut the topic down. We've seen in 2018 that stigma is alive and well, so you can imagine what it was like in 1997. I wanted the whole thing to go away, and it did go away for a bit. My luck held out till I was ill again. Very common. If you've had one major episode, you're likely to have a second. And I crashed. I was very ill again a few years later, and I was ill roughly for around 2 years. Anybody in the room a parent? Okay, so I know it was roughly 2 years of being very unwell, because I didn't do a school run for 2 years. And you'll all know how much you mind about doing a school run. So that major episode ended about 8-9 years ago. And at that point, I was well enough to begin to consider, how could I look after my mental health? So the last sort of 7 or 8 years of my life have been on this journey to discover what else is there that we can do for our mental health beyond medication and CBT. And it was about 3 or 4 years into that journey that I literally chanced on nutrition. And what happened was, I went to see my GP, and I said, how are you getting on? And I said, well, I'm okay, I've done my mindfulness. You've all done your mindfulness? Yeah, everyone's done their mindfulness by now. And I'd done my CBT, got my medication. And how are you feeling? Okay, not terrific. And as I was leaving, she turned around and she said, happy foods. I was electrified. I said, what do you mean, happy foods? I've never heard of happy foods. I've heard about, diet and cancer, and I've heard about diet and, hearts. I've never heard about diet and mood and diet and mental health. And she said, yeah, it's really quite an interesting new area. And I said, tell me more. She said, well, the awful thing is, she said, I'm not very qualified. And I said, well, why not? She said, well, an NHS doctor, well, you guess. Anyone want to guess how many hours training in a 5-year medical training an NHS doctor gets on nutrition? What? Half an hour, okay. Sorry? 3 days, okay. Well, I double-checked with Rupi, who's the expert, and actually it's 10 hours. Okay? So she had 10 hours training. So she just left me with this tantalising hint that there was this prospect of looking after myself. And she named 3 happy foods. She named dark green leafy vegetables. She named oily fish. And you can imagine, by this time, I was just kind of bursting with excitement, because she said dark chocolate. And I actually liked dark chocolate. And I was going, well, but why? And she said, well, I can't, my time was up. Anyway, being quite the nerdy type and the reporter, and wanting to know more, and desperate not to have a third major depressive episode, which I knew I was likely to have, da-da-da, along came Alice into my life. And I spent a bit of time finding Alice. She's incredible. 2 degrees, nutritional therapy, nutritional science. She knows her stuff. And she understood me, and we got on, bang, from the moment we met. So I went to see her, and I said, look, Alice, I want to know about this thing called Happy Foods. What am I going to do? We spent 5 years together. What we did...
It didn't take that long, but...
No, that is true. Really great point that Mark made. In fact, I would say that almost instantly I started to feel better once I started to make some of these nutritional changes. First one that was really easy to remember, cut the crap. Carbonated drinks, refined sugars, aspartame and additives, and processed meats and processed foods. All the way, I needed tricks to remember all this stuff, because there's a load of stuff. I'm not a nutritionist. I'm not like Alice, who's brilliant, and Rupi, who's brilliant. I'm not a trained expert. I'm an expert patient. So I kept having to find ways to remember what to do and how to do it. So I'm going to share all my tricks. So remember crap. Can you all remember what it means? Carbonated? Refined? Yeah, very good. Carbonated drinks, refined sugars, aspartame and additives, and processed meats and processed foods. Since this journey, I've been very lucky. I'm working at the moment with a group at the Maudsley Hospital, psychiatric hospital. Our people who suffer from anxiety and depression, they're seeing improvements in almost 1 day, 1-2 days when they start on cutting the crap. Okay, so that's stuff to cut out. What I did with Alice, and Alice is going to go into it in much more detail, and also share, we're giving you all our secrets. She's going to share our 10 golden rules for good mood food. And in addition, all our slides are there for you to have if you want copies. We're going to put them on the Action for Happiness website. So there's loads of info, and you don't have to try and get stressed and remember it. Remember, we're all trying to be calm and happy, right? So, okay, this is what we did. We got together, and we went through my symptoms. So we started balanced energy. Now, I had very little energy, which is often a symptom of low mood and depression. Alice explained what to do. What should I eat for my balanced energy? Then we went to beating the blues, low mood. What to do for low mood. Nice and calm, how not to be anxious. Mental clarity. Mark made that great point. It isn't just about improving and boosting your mood. It's also about thinking clearly and straight and in a good way. Hormonal peace. Lots of links between low mood, depression, anxiety, and hormonal change. You know, we see it with adolescents, we see it with postnatal women, menopausal women, menopausal men. There's a link there between nutrition, mental health, and hormones. Hormonal peace. Sweet dreams. We already saw half the room can't get to sleep. There are some nutritional interventions which may help to get you to sleep. And finally, comfort food. Now, when you're gloomy, what do? You go for the sugary foods or a lot of drinking. Actually, I never did that, but I did go for the sugary foods. The psychology of eating. This is what me and Alice worked on together. We looked at 150 studies over that period. In the book, we reference our studies. So we say, this is a good study. This is what you need to look at. Nutritional research is really complicated in the sense, it's not complicated, hasn't got the money. Pharmaceutical companies got the money. Drug research gets the money. Nutritional research doesn't. We probably looked at twice that number of studies. We only stuck with 150 where we were really confident that the evidence was good. Gold class, gold standard, proper randomized controlled trial, all the stuff that Alice knows about. I'm going to pretty much stop there because Alice is the expert. We're a double act. We work together. And there were loads more practical things that Alice helped me with, like having a food diary and how to increase variety and going on shopping trips together. And then we developed loads of recipes. So I found it was hard to remember all this stuff. So we wrote recipes so that you didn't have to remember it all. And I'm going to finish with one last thing. Alice is going to tell you about gut health. You'd all have had to have been under a stone not to have heard about gut health. You've all heard about gut health, right? I had to keep remembering how to remember things. Healthy bacteria, this is what I use. Probiotics, that's the healthy bacteria. The way I remember it is the O, is like the O in yogurt. So that's things like kefir, sauerkraut, yogurt, fermented foods. O, obiotics. And prebiotics, that's the dark green leafy vegetables. That's the stuff that the obiotics feed on. That's the sort of thing that we came up with. How do you actually put all this stuff into action? But now Alice is going to tell you the real stuff. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Rachel. So I'm a nutritional therapist here in London, and I do a few things with my time. I was very lucky to have the opportunity to write this book with Rachel last year, and we bang the drum, don't we? We go around telling as many people as we can about the importance of eating well on mental health, and it's so nice to see so many of you here interested in that. It's a really great sign of the times. First and foremost, my job is a nutritionist. I have a clinic here in central London, and I see people for all sorts of reasons. Low energy, general well-being, but also digestive problems, immune imbalances, hormonal imbalances, everything in between, really, skin problems, and of course, depression and anxiety. And I think I'm constantly amazed at the power of nutrition and just how amazing it can be. And I think when we were researching this book, we found some really compelling evidence on the links between mood and food. And that's what we've presented to you in the book. And I think one of the things that we were really amazed about was that until quite recently, mental health issues were thought to be very much issues within the brain. And of course they are. You know, there are imbalances in neurotransmitters and so on that can lead to sort of mood problems. But actually it's so much more than that. We're learning now that problems with digestion can impact on mental health. Hormonal imbalances, as Rachel said, immune imbalances, not sleeping properly. And so we present this information to you in the book. Now, I haven't got very long, but I did want to be able to give you some things to go away with today, some little tips that you can hopefully incorporate into your diet. All of it's in the book. The slides will be made available to you, but hopefully some of these little tips are going to be useful to you now. I'm going to talk through what are our 10 golden rules. They're principles, really, for how to eat for mental health. It sort of brings together everything that we discovered in the book. It's really the backbone of our book. So I'm going to go through these very quickly, and I hope it's not going to be too much information. But our first principle is to start by eating more plants, fruits, vegetables, plant-based foods such as lentils, beans, pulses, nuts and seeds, whole grains. That doesn't necessarily mean that we advocate a vegan diet or that everyone should be going vegan, but most people are not eating enough plants. Most people in this country certainly are not getting their 5 a day, and actually it's looking like we should be having more like 7 a day. So we should be definitely trying to hit our 5 a day, if not more, if we can, predominantly vegetables and a little bit of fruit, and having more fibre from whole grains and things like beans and pulses and nuts and seeds. The reason being is that these contain, not only do they contain fibre, which is very important for feeding good bacteria, as Rachel mentioned, but also they help to deliver a variety of different vitamins and minerals that our bodies need, our immune system needs, our hormone balance needs, our brains need to keep them healthy. And we need these vitamins and minerals. So try to work on getting more. Really simple, but we should be trying to do that as much as possible. I kind of say to people, get sort of 25% whole grain vegetables on your plate with, say, 25% protein, and then the rest should be vegetables, ideally. So 25% whole grains, 25% protein, and then ideally the rest vegetables. Right, principle number 2 is to use more herbs and spices. This is probably one of my favourite ones, actually, because I do think herbs and spices bring vibrancy and colour to your food, but they also bring a lot of mood-supporting properties. Now, we looked at a number of herbs, and we found some really interesting evidence, but in particular, we found saffron, which is a very expensive ingredient, let's face it. So we're not saying sprinkle it over everything, but in some research, and to be fair, the research was done on supplementation, but it was compared to Prozac and actually found to have similar effects. Now, obviously, more research is needed, as it is with most things with nutrition, but amazing that something like saffron could have that kind of impact on our mental health. Even just smelling it, the aromas, I sometimes put it into a sort of chai tea blend. I actually made one this afternoon, and we have a recipe for that in our book. And actually just smelling the saffron, just from a couple of strands, is enough to make a difference. Turmeric is another one that's really hit the headlines in recently, and everyone's emptying turmeric into everything. I think there is, some of the evidence behind this. There isn't a lot of evidence behind a lot of the things that people are claiming, so we've got to keep that in mind. But it does contain some very powerful antioxidant and anti-inflammatory compounds. And when it comes to mood, these seem to be supportive because they promote anti-inflammatory reactions predominantly in the gut, which seems to be very good for our mental health. So using more turmeric is only going to be a good thing. Certainly not going to do any harm unless you consume too much of it. We also looked at things like rosemary, but just get more herbs and spices into what you're eating. Ideally fresh, and I always say to people, make sure they haven't been at the back of a cupboard for the last 10 years, which a lot of people do find that their herbs and spices have been there for too long. Principle number 3 is to eat more nuts and seeds, like that squirrel. I'm not saying that there is definitely, you can eat too much when it comes to this, and by the amounts that we're advocating is sort of 2 palmfuls per day, say. But nuts and seeds, I think of them as the eggs of the plant world. They contain information to create life, and inherently they are really, really nutritious. Nutrients like zinc, magnesium, calcium, selenium, B vitamins, all really important things to support our mental health. Iron, so try to get more nuts and seeds in your diet. Get a variety of different things. Use things like tahini in salad dressings. It's really nutrient rich. Also full of good fats, which is also very important. I'll talk about that in a sec. So, digestive health. Rachel's touched on this, and it's such an enormous subject, and I don't even think we're at the beginning of understanding all of the links between mood and mental and digestive health. But there is so much evidence that's suggesting now that the gut is actually the second brain, and you would think that it was the brain controlling the gut, but actually we know now that there are signals that are sent from the gut to the brain as well. There is a nerve that links the two. It's called the vagus nerve, and I always imagine it's sort of like a neon strip kind of going through our bodies, and it transfers a lot of information about what's happening in the gut to the brain, and we want to keep the digestive system healthy. This is a big subject, but eating foods that contain good levels of bacteria, prebiotics, probiotics is going to help that. Also supporting that bacteria with fibre from the diet, vegetables, whole grains, really, really important. So try to get more of those things. Anti-inflammatory foods are also really important. When Rachel mentioned cut the crap, a lot of those crap foods aren't great for the gut. So that should really help on that perspective. Okay, so and it's a big subject. Kefir, sauerkraut, kimchi, kombucha, these things are becoming more available, so hopefully you can try and get a few more of these into the diet. Fats, I'm guessing a lot of you know that fats are important for the brain. The brain is made up of almost 60% lipids, and we want to support the fat levels in our brain with the right fats in our diet. A lot of people eat too much of the sort of vegetable oils and things that are put into sort of crisps and cakes and processed foods, where we actually need to have more omega-3. Omega-3 is found in oily fish, it's found in some nuts and things like flaxseed, hemp seeds, but it's also found in green leafy vegetables as well. Try to get more omega-3 into your diet. And you should also be, the main fats to cut back on are not so much the saturated fats. Of course we shouldn't be eating too many of those, but a little bit of meat, not going to do you too much harm in terms of those fats, probably quite good for you. The fats to be reducing are trans fats, and those, again, are found in these crap foods. Vegetable oils, margarine in particular is an absolute shocker. Rachel always laughs because I always say that margarine, it's one of the only foods that isn't eaten by cockroaches. And frankly, if it's not good enough for them, then none of us should be eating it. So yes, get more fats. And actually that is oily fish, say 3 times a week, but it's also things like avocados, again, nuts and seeds, extra virgin olive oil, really great ways to bring up the healthy fat levels in your body. Protein, I mentioned about veganism. A lot of people are cutting a lot of protein out of their diets at the moment. I'm not saying that we should all be emptying protein powder into what we're eating either, but we do need some protein in the diet. Amino acids are the building blocks of protein, and there are lots of different types of these, and we need all of them to support our bodies physically and sort of structurally, but also chemically. And so if you eat meat and fish and eggs, you should be getting them in. Not too much of a problem. But if you are a vegetarian or if you're vegan, you should take special attention to make sure you're getting enough protein. Beans, pulses, lentils, nuts, seeds, a bit of tofu, tempeh, all those things deliver protein. So you should hopefully be getting enough, but it's just to make sure that you are focusing on that. Meat and fish do also contain zinc, iron, iodine, B vitamins, really important nutrients for the brain. So we definitely want to be making sure that we're getting enough protein and the right types of protein. I normally say just try and get some protein with every meal. That doesn't necessarily mean you have to have meat or fish with every meal, but a few nuts in your salad or some tahini in your salad dressing or some hummus, for example, would be a great idea, a great way to get that protein in. We've sort of touched on aspartame and sweeteners, additives. There's some patchy evidence out there, but in general, we just think that cutting out these chemicals and artificial ingredients is a really good idea. Aspartame in particular has been shown to decrease serotonin levels, and we also know that sweeteners, apart from things like stevia, but generally sweeteners which are unnatural are definitely not good for the balance of bacteria in our bodies either. So we do want to try to reduce those. I also think people should be trying to reduce sugar. And if you're trying to do that and you're also eating sweeteners, you're not going to be able to kick the habit. It does sort of just prolong it. So something to be thinking about, trying to reduce those things. Right, number 8, keeping blood sugar levels. We all know what it's like to have low blood sugar. It's not a productive time. It's not a happy time for many of us. And a lot of people can feel very anxious when their blood sugar levels are low. A lot of people are relying on coffee at times like this, which then can actually cause more anxiety. So you don't want blood sugar shooting up and down too much during the day. And so the general advice for this is to choose fibrous whole grains instead of white carbs, and also try to combine protein with your meals, which I've mentioned already to you. That's quite important, and generally 3 meals per day is a good idea. If you are a particularly anxious person, you could consider snacking too, but only if you really need to. Also, ideally reducing as much sugar from the diet as possible, so added sugar in particular. Okay, number 9. So the last 2 are less sort of nutrition tips, more sort of general guidelines and lifestyle things. Get variety in your diet. Ancient man, our sort of prehistoric ancestors, got up to 150 ingredients per week. And a lot of people are getting more like 20, which is a scary thought. But actually, when you think about it, you're buying the same things in the supermarkets, you get the same salad at Pret every day, you put the same things into sandwiches. You know, it's easy to be, especially when you're really busy, eat the same things and get as much variety as possible. You know, add spices into things. It's so easy to do that. You're getting more variety. The more variety you get, the more chance, or the less chance there is of deficiencies in nutrients. So try to get different things. And apart from anything else, it keeps it interesting. New flavours and new dishes stimulate dopamine, which is one of our happy hormones, happy neurotransmitters. So certainly worth trying to get variety in the diet. And lastly, we're not about restriction and, you know, depriving yourself of things you love. You know, we love food, and we want other people to love food as well. This is not about falling out of love with food. It's about eating well 80% of the time, and then eating what you fancy 20% of the time, which is totally fine. We don't really think you should have to give up too much. Sometimes, you know, one of those things in the crap thing will squeeze into your diet, and that's not a problem. Don't worry about it. Enjoy what you're eating. If you enjoy what you're eating, you're more likely to absorb the nutrients from it. Slow down, enjoy your meals, be more mindful. And we think that's a really good philosophy for life in general as well. So hopefully some of those things were useful. That was a lot of information to download to you, so I hope it hasn't been too overwhelming. It is, of course, all in the book. And we have some time for questions at the end after EP as well. So thank you very much.
Allison, Rachel, thank you so much. That was absolutely brilliant and lots of food for thought. And as we heard. We're yes. Interesting choice of a metaphor there, isn't it? Yeah. We'll try and make those slides available on our website and send that out and link to you all tomorrow. I love the work that both these two have done. I love the book and have been looking at the recipes and big follower of it. But I thought it would be really good to have a sort of medical GP-style perspective here as well. And I was, some of you might have been at the event we did with Dr. Rangan Chatterjee, the BBC doctor in the house here earlier this year. And again, very big follower of his work. And I was listening to his podcast, and he had Rupi Aujla on his podcast recently. And I was really blown away by the story, which I'm hoping Rupi will share with us when he comes to take the stage, about his work as a GP, but also the passion that's developed for the topics we've been talking about and some of the ways in which he's brought that to life. So I'd like you to join me in giving a very warm welcome to Dr. Rupi Aujla, who's with us this evening. Thank you. Hopefully that's you on screen. Great.
That's great.
Great.
Oh,
thanks.
right, okay. Whilst the slide's going up, hello, my name's Rupi. I'm a medical doctor. I work as a general practitioner. I do emergency medicine as well. And I'm a firm believer in what you choose to put on your plate being one of the most important health interventions that anyone can make. About 2.5 years ago now, I started a passion project called The Doctor's Kitchen, which is a YouTube channel, social media channels, where I create recipes and I talk about the clinical research behind the ingredients I use in an effort to inspire everybody, including my colleagues, about the beauty of food and the medicinal effects of eating well. And since starting this project, I find myself in a situation where, yes, I've written a cookbook, yes, I'm doing more events like this and actually spreading the message of why food is so important, but I'm also in a position where I'm trying to figure out how all doctors can embrace this science and actually have a lifestyle medicine conversation with their patients. So it's not just up to people like myself or Dr. Chatterjee to spread the message, but we're actually changing the way the medical curriculum currently stands as it is. My journey actually started as a patient myself. So when I qualified in 2009, I was working in Basildon. It's a really busy hospital. I was 3 months into the job, probably wasn't eating right. I was certainly stressed. I was definitely sleep deprived. And I remember it was 12 days into a long shift. I was sat at the nurse's station. I was writing in some notes. My bleep was casually going off, as it always does. And I started getting heart palpitations. And it was going for about 2 minutes before I really thought, wow, I'm about to pass out. And I actually mustered the confidence to go to my boss and say, would you mind feeling my pulse? I think I'm going a bit fast. And within half an hour, I had my bleep taken off me. I was stripped and put into a hospital gown, and I was parked in a cardiac monitor bay right next to a patient that I'd just been seeing earlier that day. I was in something called atrial fibrillation, which is a cardiac condition where your heart beats exceptionally fast, and in my case, very irregular. And after being monitored overnight and given some medications, luckily that overcame this particular episode. And I thought that was it. Perhaps I'd had a bit too much caffeine, perhaps I was stressed, perhaps I didn't get enough sleep, or there was something else going on. But actually, this would start happening 2 to 3 times per week for anywhere between 12 and 36 hours for the next 1.5 years. And over the next 3 to 6 months, I saw multiple different physicians. I saw cardiologists. I saw colleagues that are very close friends of mine now as well in senior positions. And I had every investigation to try and figure out what the trigger was, what the cause was, and none was found. And in a 24-year-old who doesn't have a family history, didn't have any other medical problems, was otherwise in great health, it was very frustrating, and I really got to experience how vulnerable it is to be a patient and how frustrating it is as well when you don't have an answer. Probably even more amplified by the fact that I was a medical doctor and I couldn't figure this out, and neither could my seniors who were much, much more experienced than me. I was pretty much put on medication the whole time, and I was going to have something called an ablation. And an ablation is where you put a wire through the groin into the major vessels, into the heart, and an area where these excitable cells are firing are ring-fenced using a laser. It's a fairly safe procedure, but it does have the risk of death in 21%, but it's still something that's quite scary. And everyone was for it. I was for it. I was a conventionally trained medical doctor. I was getting the advice from a lot of my seniors. This is the way that was definitely meant to go. I got multiple second opinions. And the one person that said, you should really do something else, was my mum. And my mum's not a doctor. She's not medically trained at all. But she said, you need to try and change your lifestyle as much as possible. You need to look at what you're eating. You need to look at your stress. You need to look at how you're sleeping. And this, in my mind, was kind of crazy talk. It wasn't something that was taught at medical school. It still isn't to this day. And it was really me trying to appease my mother that actually led me to at least giving it a try for 6 months. Now, importantly, I actually got the blessing of my cardiologist before I did this. So they said to me, it's fine if you want to try some lifestyle means, but you're going to have this procedure in about 6 months' time, and you can take the medications in the meantime, which I did. So what did I do? There isn't a blueprint for this. I kind of had to do a lot of research myself. I started with my diet, and that was the easiest starting point for me, and it is for a lot of my patients as well. So out went cereals for breakfast, out went the hospital sandwiches. I never left my house without having Tupperware. It would be having things like miso and nuts and dark green leafy vegetables. I was a really keen cook, luckily, because my mum taught me how to cook before I went to medical school. So instead of making the steaks and all the rest of the stuff that I was used to eating, I would eat a lot more plant-focused. I started addressing my stress by practicing meditation, which is something my mum actually taught me how to do when I was a teenager. I started looking at my sleep habits, and when I wasn't on night shifts, I would always try and make sure that I optimized my rest period. And this is all whilst doing the hectic job of a junior doctor. I refused to give up my position because of my condition. I didn't let it own me. And what happened was that my episodes went from 2 to 3 times per week to 0 over a 12, 18-month period. Now, retrospectively, it's really hard to ascertain exactly what I did. And in truth, it's not one thing that I did. It certainly wasn't just diet. It certainly wasn't just sleep. It was a holistic perspective that I took to try to optimize my internal physiology as best I could. And yes, I used food as a delivery mechanism, but I really did loads of things around that. And since that kind of episode for me, I started doing a lot more research into the nutritional benefits of eating well and just seeing what the intersection of good diet is across all medical specialties. I started having more open, honest conversations with my patients. I started writing recipes down for them. And that's when the Doctor's Kitchen was born, because in my head at least, I had a patient that I was giving some advice about for their diabetes and arthritis as well. And I gave him a whole different suggestions for breakfast, changing it up. He was on cereals. I was telling him about oats. I was telling him about how to introduce nuts and seeds and that kind of stuff into his diet. And I gave him a whole bunch of recipes. And as he was leaving the door, he turned around and said, "Doctor, one more thing. Can you tell me how to make oats?" And then it dawned on me that I was assuming people have a level of knowledge that they actually don't. We've actually lost the ability to cook for ourselves. The generational sort of process of handing down recipes and ways of doing things has been lost in modern society. And that's when I thought, why don't I put myself in front of a camera and start creating recipes on YouTube? And then the rest has led to a book and everything else. But the principles that I use have actually been touched on very expertly, so I'm not going to go through them in too much detail. But it's about colorful eating, eating more whole, eating more fiber for a number of reasons, like the gut microbiome, getting used to eating fats, and also a plant-focused lifestyle. Now, I'm not vegan, but I eat anywhere between 85 to 90% of my meals as plant-based, because that is certainly the best way to go from an evidence-based point of view. And certainly, when you eat this way, it's not actually just necessarily for your brain health. You're eating for the holistic nature. You're eating for every aspect of your physiology, whether that be for blood sugar regulation, whether it be for cardiac health, whether it be for your cholesterol, whether it be for inflammation, or even those causing things like arthritis as well. So colorful eating, as has already been told, is really about micronutrient density and something called phytonutrients or phytochemicals, which are the complex arrangement of compounds that you find in plants. And there are thousands of this compared to micronutrients that you find in vitamins and minerals. These individual chemicals haven't even been fully discovered yet. I think there's around 7,000 or 8,000, and they certainly haven't been studied properly either. But there are some really interesting research studies looking at key ones that you find in everything from your simple red pepper to your apple to your kale leaf. And every food, I want to say this very clearly, every food deserves a platform to be labeled a superfood. Because when you look at the research, it's pretty incredible about how those everyday accessible ingredients have these sorts of effects on our physiology. The other aspect of introducing these sorts of chemicals is that it literally has an effect on the expression of your DNA. So your DNA is the code that you inherit from mother and father and cannot be changed, but the expression of that sequence can be changed by your lifestyle. One of the major factors that changes that expression is your diet as well. And so when you eat this way, you're actually changing a lot more than just mood chemicals and everything else. Eating more whole. So a lot of people make this seem as if we should be eating raw food compared to processed food. Now, food exists on a spectrum, and it's really important to understand that by virtue of cooking or steaming or even chewing your food, you are processing it to a less whole form. So it's more about moving the spectrum from processed and ultra-processed food that a lot of the population is reliant on towards healthy whole foods. And you get this in sweet potatoes or whole grains, things with the skins on instead of processing a food so it's white and beige, essentially. Those are the easiest concepts to come across. Fiber is certainly very, very important. And as has just been said, the science around the microbiome, which is the population of microbes that live in and around your body but largely concentrated in your gut, is accelerating at a rapid pace. But the more we know about it, the less we actually understand and the more confusing it actually gets. But there are some certain things to take from the research, and that is the best way to improve your microbiome or to utilize the research is to nurture your microbiome as best as possible. And you do that with a varied diet, with things like spices and things like different types of fiber. Chicory, artichokes, garlic, onion, these are sorts of things which are specialized sorts of fiber called prebiotics, and those are essential for your microbiome as well. So getting more fiber in your diet isn't just about improving your sugar or even reducing your cancer risk, which is very well documented. It's about feeding this incredible population of bacteria, fungi, viruses, but largely bacteria that are concentrated in your gut, but all over your body as well. Fats, like I said, oh no, we're on plants now. Plant focus. So when I say plant focus, I mean, anywhere between 80-20, it's been said. But a lot of people worry that you can't get enough protein if you're going to be plant-focused lifestyle, where there are so many different sources of protein in a plant-focused diet. Beans, legumes, nuts, seeds. And there are whole sources as well as incomplete sources. But when you introduce variety around plants, you're going to be getting adequate means of all those different macronutrients too. When you look at the research, Mediterranean diets are generally the best starting point for a lot of people, and that is actually very vegetarian. It does focus on things like nuts, beans, pulses, as well as moderate amounts of red meat and oily fish as well, which is an essential place of getting omega-3. Fats, like I said, we need to get them a lot more comfortable about talking about how important fats are, because they're important for things like cell structure, things like our brain. And we need to differentiate between the good sources of fats and the trans fats, as already been said. So biscuits, cookies, deep fried foods, those industrially processed oils that are chemically extracted, corn oils and sunflower oil, unfortunately, are not the way to go. You want to have whole sources of fats, avocado, nuts, seeds, extra virgin olive oil, minimally processed is best. And the bigger picture really for me is how we actually educate doctors. And I've started a non-profit called Calorie Medicine, where we teach doctors the foundations of clinical nutrition as well as how to cook. and we're actually going to Bristol Medical School for the first time in the UK, where we're going to be taking a cohort of medical students and we're going to get them in the kitchen for 4 weeks, and with a chef, with a dietitian, with myself, and we're going to be teaching them about all the different principles, as well as the food that they can actually talk to about with their patients. And whether they become psychiatrists or orthopedic surgeons or hospitalists or GPs, everyone should have that level of knowledge where they can actually have those conversations in a clinical scenario wherever they are. So I hope that's given a little bit of insight into what I'm about and how important I think it is to talk about food and mental health, because it's so, so important. And it's very well recognized as well. And if there's any paper that I would recommend everyone read, it's an open resource. It's called Nutritional Psychiatry, and it came out in The Lancet in 2015. And it was a very, very easy paper to read and a very simple paper to read about how we need to adopt a conversation around colourful eating, Mediterranean-style food, and the impact on mental health conditions as well, of all different varieties. Thanks so much for listening to me. It's an absolute pleasure being here, and I welcome your questions. Can you sit there?
Rupi, thank you so much. Can you still hear me, folks? Is that okay? Yeah, cool. That was wonderful. I mean, what an amazing amount to take in from both of those presentations. And while they're in front of me here, I would highly recommend both these fabulous books that have lots more on that. We've got half an hour for a great discussion here, and there's so much that I'm sure you wanted to ask, and I will come to you in a moment and hear lots of questions. But I wanted to sort of take this opportunity while we're all together to sort of reflect on a few things I think we've heard, and also things that I think are hopefully relevant to all of us. And one of them is a strong sense I got when I first became interested in this a few years ago was to some extent that we've had the wrong bad guy in a lot of the narrative we've had around food. And certainly the perspective I had when I was first told I had a risk of high cholesterol or other sort of things that made me suddenly think about what I ate was that the bad guy was eating fatty foods, actually. And in fact, what I did was to go into a lot of low-fat products and low-fat milks and low-fat yogurts and low-fat things, because that felt like the healthy thing to do. And of course, what I've since learned is those low-fat products are very often able to be edible taste-wise because they've been added sugar and other things to sort of combat that. And what I think I've heard from all three of you actually this evening is that fats, especially what you might call healthy fats in nuts and avocados and olive oil and so on, is not only vital but is actually incredibly beneficial. And in fact, that feels to me the message you're sharing there is rather different to a lot of what we hear still. We still hear that it's the kind of about low fat, and actually in some ways until perhaps some of the recent stuff with, some of you will have seen Jamie Oliver and Hugh Ferling-Whittle doing this very interesting stuff recently about sugar and the fat fight and so on. And what seems to come out there very strongly is this: actually sugar is unbelievably bad for us in many forms. But that feels like quite a recent shift, and that we may have historically had this message a bit wrong. Do you sense that our public health message, our general public awareness of what is healthy and indeed what is unhealthy is a bit broken? Is that fair? Who wants to start?
Yeah, I think me representing the medical profession, we have to be quite apologetic about the kind of claims or the kind of information that we've been given out over the last 20, 30 years, because it's been incorrect. The low-fat movement, I think, is probably one of the worst things that we could have done at a population level. Similarly, I think we need to also be careful about demonizing one particular thing. And I think right now it's sugar, but before it was fat. And if we demonize one thing, and we're very black and white, we like to think like, oh, if we just rid that, then we'll be fine. It's not as simple as that. We are complex beings, we're complex organisms, and it's not just about ridding one thing. But certainly, yeah, I think the public health messaging is something that we need to think about very clearly before we start making claims.
Thank you.
I would say as well, I think it's very interesting that calories have been a marker for health as well, and that's what leads into the low-fat thing. Fat has more calories than sugar and protein, and so therefore, because it's higher in calories, it's not good for us. And that, I guess, it leads back to weight, doesn't it? It's everyone trying to sort of think about how they can get slimmer. But actually you can be slim but really unhealthy. Again, that's not a marker for your health either. So it's sort of moving away. And so many products are still marketed as being healthy or under 100 calories or something. That it's misleading for people.
Yeah. And I think from a sort of patient point of view, that point you make about demonising things. So one of the first things that Alice taught me in our kind of conversation was not to say things were good or bad.
Yeah.
So basically, if you say something's bad, you're drawn to it, right? So we always talked about things that are healthy or less healthy. Bacteria is the healthy bacteria, the slightly less healthy bacteria. And that sort of the stigma around food, isn't there, as well? So psychologically, I think, too much focusing on the bad guys actually is taking us the wrong way. And one of the things I love, your point about variety, and increasing more variety, that's just such a positive message. We're not saying let's cut all this stuff out or cut it out, but more, let's reach out and food's your friend.
Yeah.
That psychologically I found much easier.
It's really hard because I understand that Public Health England are in a rock and a hard place because they want to promote a healthy message, but they want it to be simple.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, me saying don't focus on the calories or don't focus on the numbers, just focus on the quality of your ingredients and sourcing your ingredients and getting a wholesome diet isn't easily as translatable as just keep it under 200 calories.
Yeah.
So that's the issue. And yeah, I do have an issue with the calorie counting thing. It's not scientific at all. You can have a very unhealthy 200 calorie lunch versus a very healthy 400 calorie meal. And it doesn't tell you anything about the metabolic effects on your body.
Thank you, Allin. In a moment, I'd like to come to some of the sort of personal actions and what we can do. But while we've sort of painted this picture of the big picture, I find a real sense of frustration and anger with the kind of environment that so many people find themselves in when it comes to food choices. Many of us in this room may have the privilege to be able to choose some fantastic vegetables and spices and so on. But if you look at the modern food environment in so many places around the UK and around the modern Western world, the only choices available are just the crap, the stuff that's processed, that doesn't have this sort of, almost anything that you've described this evening. And so it feels to me that there are many people who are struggling not only with their physical health, obesity, maybe diabetes, maybe other chronic diseases, but actually, as we've heard this evening, their mood and their mental health and their decision-making, really fundamental. Yeah. And yet, how can you deal with that when you're in an environment where literally any choice you have on it is like the convenience food, the takeaway, it feels to me we've got a major national sort of societal challenge here. Yeah. Is there any beacons of hope that you think in responding to that?
It's quite poor, unfortunately. Yeah. Sorry.
Veggie bread.
Veggie bread. I think some research came out from the Royal Society of Public Health looking at how convenience stores are circling schools, and there's certainly much more access to poor quality food in low socioeconomic areas. So it's no wonder that we're getting sicker and sicker because unfortunately those who have less access to these things are being surrounded and bombarded by these messages. One thing, I think there are some beacons of hope though. I work as an ambassador for a community kitchen called Made in Hackney. They're lottery funded. I don't know if you've come across them before, but they're a fantastic organisation. And they teach the local population about where to get plant-based foods from organically and where to get it really cheaply, as well as what to do with it. So I teach them how to make pew lentils and different sorts of beans from scratch and butternut squash and what to do with it and that kind of stuff. And I lend a scientific sort of clinical opinion on why this is actually going to be impactful on lots of different conditions and in a preventative manner as well. So there are little beacons of that, and my big wacky idea is to have every GP surgery affiliated with a community kitchen, just like Made in Hackney. Yeah, and a little shout out for them. I'm doing something with them next Saturday. So if you go on their website, all the proceeds go to the community kitchen Made in Hackney, and they're phenomenal. We need to see more of them.
Brilliant. That's a great idea. Other thoughts on ways we can
I think
put
a really
this right?
simple thing, so working with some companies who are concerned, because obviously most people spend most of their time at work, and how are you going to improve your nutrition? So there's quite a movement now of kitchens and encouraging staff to cook and even communal cooking, and that is beginning to happen. And I'm sure you're right, that's brilliant what you're doing, but I think actually companies getting behind it, and a healthy workforce is a happy workforce and vice versa, and that is beginning to shift, that people are realising that you've got to make it possible, not just you're bringing your Tupperware box, but also then making that part of working life.
Yeah. And no more pressing than the NHS. I mean, we have access to literally nothing in hospitals. I mean, we're bombarded with convenience takeouts, and so are the patients and the visitors. And if we're not looking after ourselves, we can't really be expected to look after
The vending
everyone else.
machines in the hospital waiting room are
Yeah.
not a beacon of
Yeah,
healthy
exactly.
food choices, are they?
Yeah, and you'll be there for like 5-6 hours, at least where I work anyway. So.
Yeah.
Alice, you feel?
Yeah, I mean, I think things are moving in the right direction. I mean, certainly I've seen a shift massively in the last 5 years. But I suppose, you know, we're all interested, aren't we? But you can't make people. I mean, ideally, you would have parents teaching their children how to cook. But if it's not in your life and it's not something you're interested in and you don't want to change or you have other priorities, it's difficult. But I think the more research that comes out about it, the more it's in the media. It's completely, you know, it's a no-brainer, as we were saying before. You know, it makes so much sense to be looking after what you're eating, but I think the message will get through on every level. It's going to take time.
And I think it's becoming much more mainstream, like that research you're referring to, and it's becoming more mainstream in the mental health conversation. So I was in Israel recently, and in Israel, if you see a psychiatrist, you see a nutritionist at the same time.
Oh, wow.
You know, it's beginning to be taken seriously within psychiatry and mental health, this whole field of nutritional psychiatry. The big new book in mental health right now is an amazing book called The Inflamed Mind by Dr. Edward Bullmore. Some of you are nodding. Psychiatrist, professor of psychiatry at Cambridge. He's on, the book is all about this. I was just like, hallelujah, it was amazing. It's all about the inflamed mind, inflammation in the brain, inflammation in the gut. A lot of the principles we've been talking about, the omega-3s for being anti-inflammatory, it's there. And he is a big name in mental health. There's a professor of psychiatry. So I think within mental health, it's beginning to take it much more seriously. And in addition, people are fed up with just the medication approach. You know, we know that a third of people do not respond to medication at all. A third of people only respond over time. We have very few studies, Rupi, correct me if I'm wrong, but we have very few long-term studies into the effects of medication. Who wouldn't rather not take medication if you possibly could? So these are very encouraging signs within psychiatry, which is just becoming much more holistic, exactly as you say. I think that would be fair.
You go to train stations now, airports. I mean, yes, hospitals, I guess, there are vending machines where they're not supplying healthy foods. But actually, if you want to do it, there are, you know, it's possible to do that. I mean, look at Pret. I mean, I mean, it's just one example, and I know it's London-centric, but they're selling they're selling almond butter with apples. You know, I mean, that's all been happening in the last few months, couple of years.
Which does bring me on to one final thing I want to ask you before we open out to the audience, which is around the cost. Because I think we all know that this stuff is important. And, you know, is it true to say that the healthy eating, whether that's for our physical health or indeed our mood and minds, is necessarily going to cost more? Or is it actually more that we've lost our knowledge of what to buy and how to prepare it? Because one of the things that Hugh Foley-Whittlestall did recently was to take a low-cost vegetable and fruit sort of stall into this part of Newcastle that doesn't have pretty good food choices. And nobody bought the vegetables because they're like, what do I do with this? So like, how do I prepare this broccoli? I have no concept of what to do with this.
Absolutely,
So is it about our knowledge, or is it about cost, or is it both? What are the barriers?
Well, I dedicate the whole chapter in my book called Healthy Eating is Not a Privilege, because I'm a passionate believer in everyone should have access to healthy eating, because our food is actually, the most nutritious, nutrient-dense food is lining our supermarket shelves, but people just don't know what to do with it, which is why I'm so passionate about Made in Hackney and why I'm so passionate about food education, because unfortunately, because of a generational thing and because of our modern lives, we've lost that capacity.
Thank you. I'd like to open out to the audience now, because I'm sure there's all kinds of great questions. So first of all, please show your hands. We've got some microphones and some of our lovely volunteers who will bring them to you. So if we can just try and keep these as succinct as possible. Let's start, Fiona, with one of this lady down here, and then we'll come take one at this side. Thank you.
Hello? Can you hear me? Okay.
Yes.
First of all, I'd like to say thank you very, very much, all four of you, actually. But I just wanted to, back in 2004, I was diagnosed with atrial fibrillation, and the doctor was talking to me about catheter ablation, which freaked me out. Yeah. So I did my own research, stuck to a vegan, plant-based diet, and between being diagnosed in the February and getting the MRI in the late May, the results back was there's nothing wrong with my heart.
Amazing.
And one of the things I cut out was I was eating this sort of dairy-free spread and a few other little fats, which obviously weren't good for me. Within 2 days, the horrible thing that was happening to my heart was like pounding and squeezing. I was getting tingling down my arms and everything. And that all stopped within a couple of days.
That's great.
So, yes, so when you started to talk about that, I was like, oh my God, you know. And just very quickly, you were saying about fats. I've been scared of fats since the 70s. And I've just now started introducing fats. And it's helped my ear, because my ear used to be really itchy and dry, and that's gone. You know, it's amazing, actually.
That's great.
Yeah,
That's really
thank you
good to
very much.
Thank you for sharing that. It's very powerful to hear such a quick change and also such a profound shift. Thank you. I said I'd come over here next. So let's take this lady with the purple sleeves. Adam, thank you. Is that pink or purple? Oh, actually, well, let's go here. Sorry, because I've... Yeah, we'll hear from both of you. No, sorry, no, please.
I'd also just like to share a story as far as medics and food. And this was a couple of years ago, and I've been green juicing now for a long time, and my brother-in-law, he had a couple of heart attacks, was taken into hospital, and I went to visit him, and he was tucking into a piece of cheesecake in the heart ward, which I found very peculiar. And he had to have 2 stents put in, but he was having them done at 2 separate times. So he had 1 put in, and then 6 weeks later, he was to go back for his 2nd stent. So I said to him, look, if you just green juice, cut out all your meat and everything, just green juice. Oh, but I still like a bacon butty. So, okay, you can have 1 a week. But eat salads and vegetables, all that kind of stuff. So he did that, to my immense surprise, because we're northerners, so we like fish and chips. And so he then goes back 6 weeks later. He's on the operating table. The consultant then is doing the test to check where to put the stent. And he thought, this is strange. So he goes to get a 2nd consultant to come and have a look. And he said, looks like it's healed itself. He went, it has healed itself because he changed his diet, which was really amazing. Awesome. I think he's back on his bacon butties now, but no more heart attacks. But I just wanted to share, because there's real evidence.
Hear all these stories. This is very inspiring. And you are also welcome to ask questions if you like, folks, as well. Thank you.
Thank you. That was really, really great. I think it's a subject that's near and dear to all our hearts. My question is on supplements and vitamins. So, you know, the quality of our fruit and veg and flour has changed. We don't have many of the nutrition that used to. I've been told that flour, for example, they've stopped adding sort of certain nutritional bits to it. So what's the role of vitamins and supplements? Because I don't believe that we can get everything from just the actual food itself.
Do you want to start?
I'll start. I have a supplement company, so I'll say that outright. So I'll be honest about that, obviously. I think that we should be able to get everything from the diet, but I do think it's difficult. And let's face it, with all the best will in the world, when you're really busy, it's not easy to eat well all the time. And I see increasingly people who are really looking after their diets, but actually I do blood tests and they're still deficient in certain things. That's not the case for everyone, and I'm sure you're going to have a slightly different opinion, perhaps. I think that most of the supplements on the market aren't good quality. I think you've got to do your research, and you've got to find people that have done their research and are delivering good quality products, and make sure that you know what you're doing, because you shouldn't just go and take something off the shelf. But I do think that there is a place for it. It's just that it's got to be done cleverly and carefully, and if you don't need to do it, then you shouldn't. But you might need to seek your advice before you do. Would be my advice. And I do also think a lot of the vitamins that get fortified in grains, cereals, they're not the best forms of the vitamins. Go to the whole food. Why have, lots of these cereals have been stripped of all of their bran, or all their goodness, which is where the nutrients are, and then they're being fortified with them afterwards. It's like, we're re-eating, we're chewing up our food before yeah.
Doesn't make any sense.
Yeah.
So not to promote my book again, but I've dedicated another chapter on supplements in the book. And yes, I think that we should be able to get the majority of our nutrition from our food if we eat a balanced, wholesome diet that is nutrient dense. Obviously, that's not going to happen in a lot of cases where there is, and supplements do have a role. The ones that I tend to talk about more often as a GP are things like omega-3, B12, vitamin D, and iron. Those are commonly deficient, but then you open a can of worms. Like there's vitamin K2, there's all different types of minerals. There's so many different things, and there is a bit of a scary tactic going out there that people are a bit more aware of our soil becoming nutritionally deplete, and it has done over the last few years, but so is our microbiome. Every generation over the last 100 or 200 years has been having less and less diversity in our microbiome. So it's kind of like, where do you stop? And where is the research base for over-supplementing? And in all honesty, I don't know. But I know that for the majority of people, if you have a nutrient-dense diet, you don't always need to have supplements. So I think the other point you made is very important there as well, about it being tailored to the patient in front of you. There's no point everyone taking one particular supplement just because at a population level it's deficient. It really depends on you and your own personal circumstances.
Yeah. And I think Dr. Carmine Pariante, I don't know if you've come across him, but I really would Google his work. He's fascinating and absolutely cutting-edge psychiatrist on this right now. He's working at King's College London, and he's using supplementing with omega-3s, which are the healthy fats that we've talked about, and he's comparing trials with the omega-3s and people taking medication. But what he would say, because I've spent time with him, is that it's, in terms of supplementation, something like omega-3s for anxiety, depends where you sit on the spectrum. So, depending how you're feeling, if you're more or less fine, as Rupi and Alice have said, fine. But he would say, if you're getting really anxious, you're going to need a lot of omega-3s. And so you have to almost become like your own physician and doctor. But I really would check out his work. It's incredible what he's doing.
What was the name of it?
He's called Dr. Carmine, Carmine, Pariante, Pariante. Sorry, that's a bit quick. Pariante. And he's at the cutting edge of looking at some of these dietary interventions for mental health.
Thank you. Very wise answers to a great question. Let's go further back to hear from someone who's waving with an orange pinky top at the back there. So, sorry, Fiona, I've made you walk the longest distance possible. Apologies.
Some upstairs as well.
And yes, we will come upstairs next as well. Thank you.
Thanks. Is there a particular food that has kind of been made out to be really super healthy, a superfood, and actually you kind of know that it's not? Like, I find myself eating like a lot of dried fruit and things, and then people telling me it's got lots of sugar in, and people saying that lots of avocados is bad. And other than just having a balance, is there any sort of key ones you'd point out as this isn't actually as good as we once thought?
Can I lead on that one? Because I'm quite passionate about this thing, and I'd be interested to hear your expert views on this. But one of the things that shocked me was to understand how much sugar is in fruit juice and smoothies. Yeah. And these things, I think everyone knows a can of fizzy drink with sugar in isn't desperately good for us. But you actually find more in an innocent smoothie or in a naked juice bar, or some of these things that are very much marketed as health food. And yet they've sort of had all the fibre taken out of them in the way that if you eat an orange or an apple, you've got the fibre and the sugar together. I get the sense that a really healthy food that we have a lot of is actually basically a can of Coke. Is that fair, or is that?
So it's about going, like what I was saying about the spectrum of foods, like trying to go more towards the whole food as possible. So if you use that as a principle, then you're not going to opt for the orange juice. You're going to opt for the orange itself, or the apple instead of the apple juice, etc. And when you blend the juice itself, you're breaking down the cell walls. You're digesting essentially that fruit or vegetable before it gets into your digestive system, so it's going to have effects on your blood sugar, inflammation, all the rest of it. So trying to eat more whole as possible is definitely the best way to go. With particular foods that are recommended. Again, the nutritional science is very weak in those certain areas. Like you were talking about saffron, for example, there's been some studies looking at that, but not enough for it to be.
But the question was actually which things do we tend to promote that actually turn out to be a bit more rogue? Or less
sorry,
helpful?
I misheard that.
So are there any things like the fruit juice example?
Yeah,
low fat things. I mean, that would be a good example.
Margarine.
Yep, margarine.
Yeah.
My favourite.
And also, I mean, within the fruit and vegetable world, I was amazed when Alice told me that a banana's got 8 teaspoons of effectively.
Not quite that much.
Not quite that much, but or grapes, i.e. there's a spectrum. So grapes, melons and bananas are particularly sweeter fruits. And then if you want a steadier release of sugar from fruit, the berries and the blackberries and the blueberries are a slower release of sugar. And equally within the vegetable world, iceberg lettuce has less of the phytonutrients and some of these is less nutritionally dense than, as it were, some of the other ones. So that not all fruit and vegetables are equally created.
Yeah, I try and tell my patients not to eat the salad actually, because there's nothing. It's just mainly water there.
Yeah.
You want to go for the vibrant colours, the deeper coloured food that actually is satiating as well as enjoyable. I mean, I don't like iceberg lettuce, unfortunately.
Oh, great.
On dried fruit is up to 70% sugar as well because it's dehydrated, and you can eat a lot of dried. You can eat how many dried apricots can you eat versus how many apricots would you eat? So, I think dried fruit can be a bit of a sugar hit. I mean, in moderation, in some kind of muesli or that you've homemade or something, fine. But snacking on loads of dried fruit, definitely not a good idea. Some of it's got added sugar as well.
Great, thank you.
Cereal bars are the other one.
Cereal bars, thank you. Now, I promised I'd come upstairs. Was there a hand raised upstairs? You want to shout out and I'll try and repeat your question if that's okay. Thank you. Great question. If you didn't hear that on the floor, that was, what can you say a bit about oils? We've heard olive oil good, we've heard certain oils bad. What about all the other things, nut oils and things in that spectrum? So oils, folks, what do we think?
So I'm a big fan of extra virgin olive oil, but there's also avocado oil, sesame oil I like. It's really about the way in which this oil or this fat has been processed. Like, how is it turned in from the nut or the seed into the oil itself? And when you look at the process, and a lot of the good brands, I don't have any affiliation with any of them, but a lot of the good brands will tell you about the temperature at which the oil was extracted and the process by which it was, whether it's pressed or using some other mechanical means. Now, the reason why that is so important is when you use a chemical extraction or a high heat processing, it damages the oil, it breaks those bonds, and that can lead to a pro-inflammatory effect. And when you consume too much of that, that's when your body can't deal with it. So I'm not saying never have sunflower oil or corn oil ever again, but certainly something to moderate in the grander scheme of things. There's nothing better for me than having like a falafel. I love it, but I know they're using really poor quality oil lots of the times. But I'm going to enjoy that in moderation. So I'm going to use things like avocado oils and extra virgin oils majority. I don't know if you agree.
Yeah, I would agree. And I think it's good to get a variety of different things. I mean, extra virgin olive oil has been slightly tainted by many people because they say, you shouldn't heat it. But actually, extra virgin olive oil is still quite resilient to heat. I mean, I'm not saying you should deep fry with it, but, cooking at a moderate temperature, sautéing things is still absolutely fine. And it probably is, research-wise, by far the best oil that we should be consuming. But a bit of rapeseed oil, as you say, some different nut oils, but the unprocessed is better.
Yeah. And use coconut. If you like coconut oil, use coconut oil. Like, I don't have anything against it. It's 1 minute it's like good and next minute it's bad. But, when you're using it appropriately for the flavour of the dish, then it's absolutely fine.
Great. Let's try and whiz through a few more. We've still got time. So let's come right to the front again. This gentleman here. Thanks, Alan.
Thank you very much. I've had the opportunity of being both sides of the fence as a mental health professional and a patient. I now serve on panels to recruit psychiatrists. And my standard question to the candidates is, what do you think is the role of nutrition, exercise, and alternative therapies in the treatment of mental illness? There's a general tittering from the other psychiatrists on the panel and a completely blank look from the candidate.
Really?
I'm currently under the care of the mental health services, and I have no less than 5 psychiatrists with an interest in my mental health. 2 of them are to use a politically correct term, vertically advantaged or clinically obese. And I think it's very hard for a psychiatrist to promote a healthy diet and exercise when they themselves aren't a good example of it. And I'll give you one final example. When I knew I was coming to this talk, I implored my mental health team to come here. I don't know whether any of them made it. Probably not, because they said, first of all, the NHS won't fund us to come here. And we finish at 5 o'clock. And so we won't be able to come to a talk that's at 7 o'clock. Now that's the state, as of today, of the mental health services. It's absolutely appalling. No time in the 40 years I've suffered depression has anyone asked about my lifestyle other than do I smoke. But what I will say, after 40 years of being on and off antidepressants, whose only effect was to make me suicidal, the thing that cured me in 2 weeks was transcranial magnetic stimulation, which is only available in 3 hospitals on the NHS in Britain. You can go to Harley Street and have it for £6,000, but it's not available. This is a proven treatment. It has no side effects, and it cured me in 2 weeks. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Really appreciate you sharing that, and I think it's really sad to hear about the attitudes towards nutrition and mental health that you've encountered, and I hope that the work that some of the people on the panel are doing here is helping to put that right. Rachel, did you want to respond specifically, given you've talked so openly about your own experiences?
Yeah, look, I mean, I completely agree. I had to go and find out myself. I totally echo your experience. Dr. Pratima Singh is another wonderful psychiatrist who does believe in this stuff. So there are some good guys. She's working at the Maudsley. And when I was last with her, she said that she thought the NHS was 17 years behind on sharing good wellbeing advice in mental health. I mean, the only good news is that it's a bit of a role for people like me and Alice and Rupi, because we are trying to go out there, you know, making this very widely available, spreading the word, you know, trying to share it as widely and as we can. But I completely agree with you, and it's awful.
Thank you, and thank you for making the point. Let's come back to this side of the room, and somewhere in the middle, let's take one right next to you there, Fiona, the gentleman. Yeah, there we go, thank you. Or lady, whichever you choose. There we go. There we go.
Thank you. I guess I just would like you to debate about something. I think we talk about happiness, and we talk about food and what we eat, but can we talk for a minute and think of how we behave for food? We reward ourselves with food when we are sad. We're coping with food. We try to impress our friend by going to the restaurant or cooking. And I guess I would like to know a bit of your opinion on how we actually act with what we eat and how we behave around that, and how much that's actually affecting our mental health and how much our mental health is affecting our behaviors. So, debate.
I think that's a
great
really
question.
good
Thank
point.
you.
Yeah. Sorry, I was going to jump right in there. I think the way in which you eat food, whether you're sat in front of a screen, whether you're sat with friends, whether you're sat at a table or you're separated, and like we were talking about, the mechanism by which you employ to eat food, are you chewing appropriately or are you scoffing it down as quick as possible? These all have drastic effects on the effect of the food on your body. And what I try and promote as much as possible is about flavor as well as function. It's about the enjoyment of that food, and we should never forgo the wealth of aromas and the taste and the deliciousness and the cultural relevance of food, the significance of just how precious eating is for the sake of just being healthy. And that's why the 80-20 rule or whatever, allowing yourself to enjoy the luxuries, is something that's very, very healthy for you. And we should never forget that.
I just add, it's a huge topic, the psychology of food, and as you brilliantly encompassed, there's so many aspects of that. There's only one thing that I would share, which is that I think it is, for me, it's a big thing about eating with others. So, you know, companion is with bread. You know, compañero in Spanish, it's with bed. There is an intimate connection, in my view, of eating, connection, some of the other incredible work that Action for Happiness does. You know, you can't tease out one element, but for me, eating alone is never going to be the same experience as eating with others.
Sorry,
Go ahead.
No, please.
I was going to say, this is a huge subject, isn't it? I mean, we came up with some comfort food recipes in our book because we knew that, everyone likes a chicken pie kind of thing. How can you make that healthier? Because I think that, yes, there's the 80-20 rule, nothing's ever going to replace fish and chips, really, but you can put a healthy slant on a lot of things. So we did bring that in, so you don't feel like you're being restricted and it's not fun. So that is something that, and there's a lot of people doing that, aren't there? Making recipes, traditional things, cottage pie, a little bit more nutritious, for example.
Very good point, thank you. What that great question made me think of was that actually something we haven't really talked about this evening, which is very much a link between food and mental health, is around eating disorders. And of course, it's a really major challenge for so many people. And it strikes me, without having any real knowledge of the topic, that there's something here about our underlying self-esteem and how that relates to everything we do, and eating is part of that. But there's also quite a lot of guilt associated with food, and this part of the problem with this, well, as you said, this food is toxic, or this food is bad for you, or you shouldn't have this product, that it accentuates that feeling of guilt and this whole idea of that I'm not eating cleanly, and and it creates this sort of fear and it almost takes away that enjoyment about food. How important is that, and how do we sort of avoid falling into that trap and developing sort of problematic eating, if you like?
I think it comes back to that balanced approach to how you look at food, and I'm lucky that I have some friends that are nutritionists and they have specialties in eating disorders, and that very much has changed the way I talk about food with my patients at an individual level, but certainly via social media channels that are dominated by people that are at risk of eating disorders because they have a general interest in healthy eating to start off with. And there's something called orthorexia that some of you may have heard of. It's a fairly new term, but it's a new branch essentially of eating disorder where you have an unhealthy obsession with healthy eating. And that is
it's a real thing.
It's something very real, and it's something that
Scary.
we as influencers as well, even though I don't like that term, have to be very mindful of as well. So I think it's a very interesting topic, but we have to balance that with the messages that need to get to the population, because overall we are really not eating well, and people don't understand this information.
Yeah, I agree.
Well, we're rapidly running out of time. We've got time for one last question. There's a couple of final announcements I want to make, and
so many questions.
I'm sure that our speakers will be very happy to stay behind and continue this conversation for a little while with you, and so we can have some more of these conversations. I'm going to come to this gentleman who's waving his hand just purely because it's the highest hand I can see, and I haven't gone to this part of the room before. So, gentleman in the blue jumper. Thank you, Alan.
Okay, thank you very much. So I would like to ask, are we hoping to see in the near future any kind of real food certification for restaurants or other food providers so that we can know what we're eating? Is there any efforts underway?
I wouldn't know, sorry.
Do you mean by the government or...
By anyone. I think there is an effort in the United States called Eat Real that certifies restaurants that anything they use, the dressings, is real food and not processed.
Yeah, certification I'm not sure about. I know there's a lot of people coming up with great apps and technology that makes food choices easier, but and they're using good science. I don't know about certification.
It probably all comes back to how we're going to interact with restaurant and food providers on a personal level. So if more people are asking for the different options or what's in the food, then they're more likely to put it on their menus because there is a public demand for this, there's a public interest for it. And you're noticing a lot more restaurants giving into that demand as well and actually trying to satisfy the consumer as much as possible, which is why you're seeing apple and peanut butter in Pret now. And I think the more we talk about this and the more people are aware, then I think restaurants will probably come on board that way, rather than having to rely on a top-down governmental approach.
Unfortunately, we're out of time. In a moment, we'll have a chance to thank our speakers, and I want to make a couple of other announcements. I just wanted to thank you all for being involved in this conversation, and I think what I sense, the real message that you guys are working so hard to get across is, in short, that our nutrition has a massive impact on every aspect of our life, including our mood and mental health. And actually, the main message is if we can get rid of some of the processed stuff and focus more on whole, real food, that's a pretty damn good starting point. So I think if we can all collectively carry these messages into our schools, our communities, our workplaces, our families, I think we start to make a bit of a difference. Rachel mentioned at the beginning when she did that thing about, do we feel able to talk about food and mental health? Do you want to revisit that, Rachel?
Yeah, I mean, just say you would all.
I mean, it's interesting this idea that actually this food topic might make it slightly easier to talk about some of the things around our mood.
I mean,
than
no,
might
seriously, a lot of people find it hard to talk about mental health. One of the very best ways, if you know somebody who's suffering in mental health awareness week, or if you yourself are finding it hard to talk about it, a really good way is to seg through by coming up with some physical aspect of it, because people find that easy to talk about. And nutrition is a great one. When I was so ill, my stomach was shot to pieces. I might have been able to be more accepting that there was something wrong with me. So just maybe that's one little takeaway. If any of you are, dealing with people and wanting to feel that you're able to chat to them, that might be just a little thought.
Thank you. So I would like to say one final thing before we close, but please join me in giving a very, very warm thank you to our three speakers this evening. Thank you so much.